9 years ago, my brother Finn stood in our father's kitchen and told me that keeping my son was the most selfish thing I had ever done. Felix was 7. He had Down syndrome. He had a laugh that could fill a parking garage, and a memory sharp enough to recite every word anyone had ever said in front of him. Something nobody in that kitchen understood until it was far too late. My brother, Randall, was 41 then and used to being the one who decided things. He had a voice built for boardrooms and a wife named Cheryl who had never in her life been wrong about anything. Together, they ran the kind of family I used to want belonged to. Clean, organized, everyone knowing their place. My father was sick. Pancreatic cancer, which moves fast and leaves no room for the things you kept meaning to say. I had driven 3 hours north to spend whatever time was left with him. I brought Felix because my father loved Felix, because he was the only one in that family who did. I should say something about Felix's father, because people always ask. He was kind, and he was present for the first 2 years, and then he wasn't. And I made my peace with that, the way you make peace with weather. You don't forgive it, you just stop expecting it to be different. Felix never asked about him. He asked about everything else, but not about that. The conversation with Randall happened the way the worst conversations do. Not in a dramatic moment, but in a quiet one. My father was resting. The kitchen smelled like the casserole a neighbor had dropped off, and Randall sat down across from me with his hands folded on the table, like he was chairing a meeting, and said it plainly. Dad's changed his will. He let that land, then he said the rest. Our father had agreed. With Randall's help, he was careful to add, as if the help were a kindness, to restructure the estate. The house, which had always been understood as something we'd share, would go to Randall outright. In exchange for a small cash settlement, I would sign a release. Clean. Simple. And if I don't sign, I said. Randall looked at Felix, who was in the living room, arranging our father's old cassette tapes by color along the edge of the coffee table. He said that a child like Felix required a level of specialized care that was beyond what any single parent could provide sustainably, that it wasn't a judgment, just a reality, that there were good facilities. He used that word, facilities, where Felix could thrive in a structured environment. That was the whole thing, laid out on the kitchen table like a balance sheet. Sign the release, or keep making the choice I'd been making and do it with nothing. I'm keeping him, I said. Cheryl, who had been standing in the doorway the entire time, made a sound that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite a word. Randall looked at me the way you look at someone who has just refused a perfectly reasonable offer. Then we're done, he said. He meant the conversation. He meant more than the conversation. I did not know until much later what he had said about me in the years after. I was 3 hours south in Columbus, doing 2 jobs and raising a boy and trying to keep the whole thing from flying apart. I didn't have time to wonder what story was being built in the town I'd left behind. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near a school with a good resource room. I took the overnight billing shift at a medical company and picked up weekend shifts at a pharmacy because the overnight shift alone didn't cover the therapies. Felix needed speech, occupational, physical, a rotating schedule I kept in a color-coded binder because my brain was full and the binder never forgot things. He was not easy to raise, and I want to be honest about that. Down syndrome looks different in every child, and in Felix it looked like a boy who processed the world at his own pace and got furious when the world refused to wait. He had hard days in grocery stores and shutdowns in crowded cafeterias, and there were Tuesdays, always Tuesdays, for some reason, where everything was too loud and too bright and too much. And the only thing that worked was sitting with him on the bathroom floor, singing whatever he wanted to hear. He loved music before he could explain why. He could hum a melody back perfectly after hearing it once. He memorized lyrics the way other kids memorized sports statistics, and when he was 9, he started writing his own. Not lyrics exactly, more like transcriptions. He would write down things people said, and then arrange them until they had a rhythm. His speech therapist noticed first. She told me he wasn't just mimicking, he was editing, choosing which words to keep. He had a spiral notebook he carried everywhere. Green cover, wire binding, the kind you buy in a 3-pack. He went through, maybe 2 a year. I bought them in bulk. I asked him once what he wrote in them. He said things people say. I assumed he meant song lyrics he was learning. He did not mean song lyrics he was learning. The music teacher, who changed everything, was a man named Mr. Obi, who ran an after-school program out of a church basement 4 blocks from our apartment. He had been a session musician for 20 years before a wrist injury ended that career, and he had more patience for strange rhythms and unexpected chord choices than anyone I have ever met. He told me within 2 months of working with Felix that my son had an ear that couldn't be taught, only born with. He hears the space between notes, he said one afternoon, watching Felix work at the upright piano in the corner. Most people hear the notes. Felix hears what surrounds them. Felix wrote his first complete song when he was 11. It was 4 minutes long, and it didn't sound like anything I could name. He played it for me on a Thursday evening after dinner, and I sat on the couch and listened, and by the end, I was crying in a way I hadn't expected, the kind that comes from somewhere below understanding. I asked him what the song was about. He held the notebook against his chest. A habit, I realized, he had developed, so that the cover faced out and the writing faced in, and he said, "It's about things that were said." I thought he meant things generally. The way kids process things generally. He did not mean things generally. By the time he was 15, Mr. Obi had connected him with a small recording collective downtown that traded studio time for the kind of session work that didn't pay enough for professionals, but was perfect for musicians who just wanted to play. Felix recorded 3 songs there. The collective sent them around. One of those songs reached a documentary production team out of New York that was making a film about institutional care, the history of it, the damage of it, what happened to the families who refused it. The director was a woman who had spent 4 years on the project. She told me later that she had listened to Felix's song 17 times in a row the first night she found it. The song was called "They Said So." I want to describe what it sounds like, because the description matters. It's slow, it builds the way bad news builds, one layer at a time. And the lyrics are simple sentences, short, declarative, the kind of sentences you'd use to state a fact. The child needs specialized care, a structured environment. This is not a judgment, this is just a reality. The director licensed the song for the film's central sequence. The documentary premiered at a major festival in January. It won an award I don't have the vocabulary for. It was picked up by a streaming platform with a very large audience. By March, They Said So had been heard by a number of people that still doesn't feel real when I say it out loud. The licensing deal was $1.1 million. Because Felix was a minor, the money went into a trust with his name on it. My attorney, a careful woman named Harwick, who operated out of an office that smelled permanently of old coffee and legal pads, drew up the custodial arrangement and told me 3 things I wrote down and kept. 1. The money is his. 2. Your job is to guard it, not touch it. 3. Document everything. I did all 3. I kept every statement. I authorized nothing. I paid myself nothing. The record was as clean as a record can be. What I didn't know was happening in those 3 months between the premiere and the lawsuit. Randall had found out about the song. His daughter, my niece, a girl named Wren, who was the only member of that family who had never been unkind to us, texted me to say that her father had been telling people at their church that he had always supported Felix's music, that he had mentored him, that whatever success Felix achieved was in large part because the family had believed in him. I read that text 3 times. I had not seen or spoken to Randall in 9 years. He had never met Mr. Obi. He had never heard Felix play. The last time he had been in the same room as my son. Felix was 7 years old, arranging cassette tapes by color, while Randall told me to put him in a facility. I took the text to Harwick and told her what I'd heard. She nodded in the way I was learning meant she had already anticipated this. She told me to wait, to let it develop, to not say anything publicly, not to Randall and not to Wren and not to anyone else. She said that people who build stories on false foundations do it because they plan to use those foundations for something. She was right. In April, the letter came. Heavy envelope, a law firm's name pressed into the corner. The kind of paper that costs extra. His clients, my brother and his wife, sought acknowledgement of their role in supporting Felix's artistic development. They also raised a concern, framed in careful language, about whether the current custodial arrangement truly served Felix's best interests, given the complexity of the financial matters and the particular challenges of his condition. The particular challenges of his condition. I read that line and my hands went still. They were going to argue that my son's disability made him unable to manage his own money. That someone, his uncle, his aunt by marriage, people who had not spoken to him since he was 7, should step in to protect him. They needed a judge to believe I couldn't be trusted. They needed a judge to believe Felix couldn't be trusted, and they had 9 years of a carefully maintained story to support the claim. In Randall's version, the version I was now learning had been circulating through our extended family for nearly a decade. I was the one who had moved away out of spite, the one who had kept Felix from a family that wanted to help him, the one who had made it impossible for his grandparents, his aunts, his uncles to be part of his life. Nobody had asked me, nobody had thought to ask. Our Aunt Glenda, my father's sister, a woman who still sent cards on every occasion and meant every word in them, called me the week after the letter arrived. She said quietly, and with some pain in her voice, "Randall just wants to make sure Felix is taken care of. You can't fault him for caring." Caring. I held that word in my mouth for a moment before I answered. "I'll let you know when there's news," I said. Then I hung up. Harwick advised me to let them come to the table and make their claims in full on the record in front of a mediator. She said that a story made of air collapses fastest when it's asked to hold weight in a room with witnesses. She said, "Let them talk." I had one question before I agreed. I went to Felix's studio, the corner of his bedroom, where Mr. Obi had helped us set up a small recording space with foam panels on the walls, and I told him what was happening, what Randall was claiming, what the letter had said. Felix was sitting cross-legged on the floor with his notebook open. He looked up at me when I said the part about the particular challenges of his condition, and his expression was the same one he made when a fact was wrong, and he was deciding whether to correct it. "He was there," Felix said. "When Dad's dad was sick." He said it. Said what? Felix looked back down at the notebook. He pressed his palm flat against the open page. He said, "I wrote it down." And then I understood, all at once and far too late, why the notebook always faced cover out. Why he had filled 2 a year since he was 9 years old. Why the lyrics of "They Said So" had sounded, the very first time I heard them, strangely specific for a song about institutional care. He hadn't been writing song lyrics. He had been keeping a record. "Felix," I said, "have you had this since?" "Since Grandpa's house," he said. "The first one had a red cover." He paused. I filled it up. He had filled up the red cover notebook that contained the meeting in our father's kitchen, and then he had kept going. I barely slept in the days before the mediation. Felix slept fine. He was finishing a new piece. Something quiet, something I could hear through the wall as chords placed carefully, one after another, like stepping stones across still water. The morning of the meeting, I found him at the kitchen table with the current notebook open and a mechanical pencil tucked behind his ear, reading back through previous pages. His lips moved slightly with the words. "Do you want to be there?" I asked. The question felt enormous. He was 16. He had never been asked to sit in a room and be evaluated by strangers who had decided things about him before they arrived. He closed the notebook. He held it flat against his chest in the familiar way. "Yes," he said. He said it the way he said things he had already decided, no room left in it for discussion. They walked in at 10 in the morning. Randall first, then Cheryl, then their attorney, a man who had the air of someone accustomed to winning things by being more prepared than everyone else in the room. Randall scanned the table when he entered. He looked at Harwick. He looked at me. He looked at the mediator, and then his eyes moved to Felix, who was sitting beside me with the notebook in his lap, both hands flat on the cover, and something crossed Randall's face that was there and gone before I could name it. Cheryl did not look at Felix at all. She looked at a spot slightly above and to the left of wherever Felix was, the way you look at something you've decided not to see. Aunt Glenda was at the far end of the table. Randall had asked her to come as a family witness, certain of her. It was his first mistake of the morning. Their attorney opened. He was smooth and careful, which is the worst kind to argue against. His clients had maintained consistent concern for the child's well-being. They had supported the family during critical periods, a lie so clean it had the shape of truth. They believed the current arrangement deserved independent review. Given the size of the estate and the particular nature of the beneficiary's condition. He gestured toward Felix without looking at him. Then Randall spoke, and the thing that struck me was how much he believed himself. That was the most dangerous part. He had told this story so many times it had grown a skin. He talked about the distance I had created, the opportunities he had tried to offer, the doors he had left open that I had refused to walk through. He talked about Felix the way you'd talk about a problem you had tried, generously, to solve. Cheryl added that they had only ever wanted what was best. And then I heard the notebook leave Felix's lap. It wasn't a dramatic sound. It was the small sound of an object placed on a wooden table, but it stopped the room the way a fire alarm stops a room, instantly and completely. Felix opened the notebook. He had a purple pen tucked in the spine. He removed it carefully, and then, without rushing, without any visible emotion at all, he read aloud. His voice was quiet, measured. He did not look up. "A child like Felix requires specialized care. That's not a judgment. That's a reality. There are good facilities where he could thrive in a structured environment." He turned the page. "You're making a choice that affects more people than just you. He will always need more than you can give." He turned another page. "If you keep doing this, we're done." The silence in the room was total. Even the mediator, who had maintained a professional expression through all of it, had gone very still. Randall said, "That's not. I didn't say it like that." Felix looked up. He looked directly at his uncle for the first time all morning. He said, "You said it exactly like that. I wrote it down the same day." He had a date written at the top of the page. The year Felix was 7. The year our father was dying. The year Randall had laid the whole thing out on the kitchen table like a balance sheet. Cheryl said the notebook could say anything. That a child writing things down didn't make them evidence of anything. Felix nodded slowly. The way he nods when he is being patient with someone who hasn't caught up yet. He turned to a page near the middle of the current notebook and pressed it open, then turned it around so it faced the table. The lyrics of They Said So were there in his handwriting, not a copy, the original draft. The dates at the top showed when each line had been written, lines that Randall would recognize as his own words beside dates from 9 years ago. Lines from other months, other rooms, assembled with care into the song that had been licensed for $1.1 million. The song, Randall, had been telling his church he had helped inspire. Aunt Glenda reached out and picked up the notebook. She is not a fast reader, but she is a thorough one. She read the page once. She turned back to the dates. She read it again. Randall, she said. One word, the same way you'd say a name when you have run out of everything else to say. He started to speak. He stopped. He tried again. He said that children don't always remember accurately, that memories are incomplete, that context matters. Felix said, I don't remember, I write it down. And that was it. That was the whole of it. Harwick let the quiet sit for the length of time it needed to. Then she asked gently if there were any remaining claims to put on the record. The attorney looked at Randall. Randall looked at the table. Cheryl looked at the spot above and to the left of where Felix was sitting. There were no remaining claims. The guardianship petition was never filed. The licensing money stayed exactly where it was, in a trust with his name on it and my clean record sitting beside it. In the weeks after, Glenda called me. She didn't have a speech prepared. She said she had believed him, because the alternative, that a brother's grief could be manufactured, that concern could be reverse engineered from greed, was too uncomfortable to hold for very long. I should have called you, she said. I should have asked. I told her I knew. I didn't rush to make her comfortable, because I had spent 9 years doing that, and I was finished with that particular job. The real story moved through our family the way Randall's version had. Kitchen to kitchen, phone call to phone call, except this time it carried something heavier than a rumor. People who had nodded along when Randall talked about his estranged sister and her difficult situation began slowly to do the math. The sister who supposedly ran away had kept a forwarding address he had never used. The boy who supposedly needed a facility had written a song with $1.1 million in it, and the lyrics are a verbatim account of the afternoon the whole story began. I didn't chase any of it. I had learned that people who need proof before they'll treat you decently will always need more of it, and I was finished producing evidence of my own worth. Felix, for his part, seemed genuinely unbothered by the aftermath. He went back to the recording setup in his bedroom the evening of the mediation and worked until midnight. I could hear him through the wall, not playing back, just building forward. I asked him once, maybe a week later, if he was angry. He thought about it in the way he does, turning the question over, making sure of his answer, before he spent any words on it. I was, he said, when I was little. Now, I just wanted the record to be right. He is working on something new. He plays parts of it for me when I come to stand in the doorway of his room, not asking for feedback, just including me. It sounds different from They Said So. Slowers are easier, on the ear, less like a document and more like a room you'd want to stay in. The notebook he brought to the mediation sits on his desk now. He has started a new one. He is already halfway through it. There is one more thing I haven't told you, because it took me a while to understand what it was. The night we got home from the mediation, after dinner, and after all the ordinary things that ordinary evenings require, Felix came into the living room with the notebook open. He tore out a single page carefully, along the spiral. He held it out to me. It wasn't one of the pages from our father's kitchen. It wasn't a date from 9 years ago or a transcription of anything anyone had done wrong. At the top, in his handwriting, he had written a date, a Tuesday from 6 years ago. One of the bad Tuesdays, one of the bathroom floor Tuesdays. Below the date, in the careful print he uses, when he is taking something seriously, he had written down what I sang to him. Just the words, and at the bottom in his looping script, a small note. This is also a thing that was said. He had kept it alongside everything else. In the same notebook, with the same ink, on the same kind of page as all the rest. A record of a mother sitting on a bathroom floor at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday, doing the only thing she knew how to do when the world was too loud. He had written it down the same way he'd written down everything that mattered, as something worth keeping, as something true. I folded the page and put it in my pocket. I still carry it. Some things don't need a studio or a licensing deal or a room full of lawyers to matter. Some things just need one person who paid enough attention to write them down. Felix understood that before I did. He has been understanding things before I do for as long as I have known him, which is 16 years, and counting, and not one of them something I would trade.